Welcome to everybody. We're at 6:31, so we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you all for joining us this evening as we have the next hour to have our financials seminar with Dr. Stanley Liu. So there is much to say about Dr. Liu, so I will very briefly introduce him, just in the way that we usually introduce medical people. I'm going to start off with the medical background and facts. So Dr. Liu obtained his undergraduate degree at the University of Maryland, where he had studied psychology. He went on to do his medical degree at the Mayo Clinic. He did his residency right back here in Maryland at Johns Hopkins Bayview Hospital, followed by his cardiology fellowship at the University of Maryland. And as I am sure that he will narrate as part of his story, he worked at Maryland for many years until 2023, and then had a transition, and that transition may have even been before that, but I know you worked there at least until that time. Currently, he is a self-employed cardiologist, and he does both locum tenens and value-based care in multiple areas, including UPMC at Western Maryland and Cumberland and Sage Health. He serves as the advocacy chair of the Maryland American College of Cardiology chapter, and is alum of the ACC's Emerging Activity Leadership Academy. During this time, he has become a fiduciary financial planner. He is a certified financial planner, and he's the founder of Doc Empowered LLC, which is a financial planning firm with the purpose to give fellow physicians the financial power to serve their families, their community, their patients in the way they would really like to do that. Um, in doing all that, I think, scope of what he has been thinking about and working on, and what we're here to learn from him today is it's wider than the direct patient care at the bedside, but how you create a medical career that prioritizes health, family, marriage, patients, and community, and sharing his personal experiences with all of us. Dr. Liu shared with us that more important than any of these things, that he is a husband and a salsa dancer, partner to his wife, Andrea, father and coach to his two children, and a dedicated member to his Baltimore, Maryland community. So thank you very much, Dr. Liu, for being with us today and sharing your experiences and your expertise with us, and welcome.
Thank you so much. I do want to clarify one thing. You mentioned I'm a certified financial planner. There's actually a distinction. I passed the exam, but I haven't quite met the experience criteria, so I can't call myself that yet. So just because this is being recorded, I don't want to say to let anyone think I misrepresented myself. The second is that my residency program director when I was at Bayview was Colleen Christmas, um, who I am very happy to see on this call, and her heart makes my heart melt too. So thank you. Um, there she is. All right. So I'll go ahead and get started and share my slides here. Um, Tested this earlier. Everyone can see that? Perfect. All right, let's get started. So we're going to talk about the financial foundations of career flexibility, which really combines two topics in one that I think are really important to understand in both manners. So why we are here. Let's head straight into the problem that we're talking about. And that is that many of us don't control our time. And I can't think of anyone who elaborated on this problem better than Morgan Housel, who said, doing something you love with a schedule you can't control can feel like something you hate. I think we've all had that feeling before. And that's what we want to be addressing today. Now, when talking to our peers here, I think as a group, we are all really good at prioritizing a few things. One is work-related tasks, calls, obligations, things that we have to do. Then all the communication stuff, charting, EMRs, texts, all the things that are core parts of our jobs. And of course, anything urgent or life-threatening. We are very good at not letting that slide. But that means that we are left trying to squeeze in a lot in the spaces in between. Things like our own physical, mental, social, spiritual health, our relationships, our communities, and things that aren't urgent but will really matter in 20 years that we are totally neglecting now. I think between this list here, we can all relate to some of that. So I'll go into a little bit about my story and what happened. As Dr. Thomas mentioned, I at one point was a very fulfilled academic cardiologist, and I was actually a fellowship program APD. And there was a point where I received an ultimatum. I had to add 10 more hours of clinical service a week without additional compensation or academic time. My other non-clinical responsibilities were still there, and my choice was either to do that or face termination. Now, at the time, uh, that was a complete blindside to me. I had not even considered looking for another job at that time. And my personal situation was I was married with 2 young children. My wife has a full-time career. Um, I was 4 years into a mortgage, and I had a very enforceable 18-month, 20-mile non-compete clause in my contract. So, looking at the numbers, I mean, they kinda had me. And the problem was this would mean that I could never take my kids to the bus stop, I could never pick them up. It would all have to fall on my wife, who was always doing extra coverage for me while I was on call. So, we had to decide what to do, and the ultimate decision we ended up doing was I resigned without a job offer in hand after negotiations failed. And we decided that we were going to ride out that 18-month non-compete without hurting the wellness of my children or uprooting my family. During that time, we would prioritize my wife's career and wellness. And by the time I got through, I would find a way to practice medicine on my own terms. And uh, spoiler alert, we managed to get it done. And I actually wrote on Kevin MD about the first time I saw a patient in my community in 18 months. Something that all of us do on the daily. We don't think anything of it. But the first time I was able to do it in 18 months, I felt such joy at finally being able to have that freedom to do that. It seems such a basic thing that was taken away from me. But those 18 months, those were challenging. What I did was I did part-time locum tenens work to ride out that time. And so ended up looking like 16 weeks of clinical work over 18 months. And that was very unsteady. I had gigs fall apart, having to scramble for plan Bs. I would go as long as 3 months without work. And overall, we lost over 6 figures in income. Now, the rest of the time I wasn't working. I was trying to be house dad of the year to try to make it up to my wife because I was away during those weeks of locums work. But this was also a time that I started planting seeds of a new career. I did what's the equivalent of becoming board eligible for the Certified Financial Planner exam, which is like the gold standard in the financial planning world. And I became a licensed financial planner. So what I do today is a mix. Clinically, I work part-time as a self-employed cardiologist. And I do about 20, like this year. I'm sorry. I will do about this year, I'll probably do about 23 weeks of in-person time, and I do a lot of remote echo reading. I have a side gig doing some CME education for PCPs and EM docs, and I'm also the advocacy chair of the ACC, as you heard, for the Maryland chapter. Uh, I am also a salsa dance partner to my wife, soccer coach to my kids, and I volunteer a lot in my community. And I'm also a business owner now. I'm the
Dan, I'm just gonna ask you, as people are joining, if you can mute your lines, we'd really appreciate it. Thank you so much. And I don't know, Mary Ellen, if you have the ability to mute folks, if you're able to. Thank you.
So, and I am currently the founder and financial planner of a firm I created, Doc Empowered, which I created for the sole purpose of teaching fellow physicians the financial power to serve their patients, families, and communities on their own terms. So, anyway, that's what I do right now. And so, why are we talking about financial planning? Is because if you're talking about career flexibility, financial planning is a critical component. And I know this from my own personal experience because many of us have thought about alternative career paths, going part-time or something else, and logistics always come in the way. If it involves an income loss, how do you do that without hurting your family? If you have irregular or part-time income, how do you manage your short-term and your long-term financial goals? If you relied on paid vacation and benefits from your full-time employer, how do you let your family thrive without them? And how do you even begin to negotiate a contract when you don't want to work full time and you don't have a job offer in hand? These are some of the questions that we'll be addressing today. So, quick disclosure: uh, Maryland ACP is not paying me for this talk, and nor is this a sponsored talk. But this is not an endorsement of my firm on Maryland ACP's behalf. And I apologize for the legalese, but because I'm a regulated financial planner, I do need to put this out here. This is for general education purposes. This should not be considered personalized financial or tax or legal advice. So please use this for general education and don't make any wild financial moves as a result of this talk until you've talked to your own dedicated financial planner. Um, the ACP and Dog Empowered, we're not responsible for any financial decisions you make, et cetera, et cetera. And if you are watching this in the future from a recording, keep in mind that this material may be out of date after the data presentation. All right, so today there's only one objective here, and I hope that everyone on this call, by the end of this talk, will identify one financial step that you will take in the next month to achieve more flexibility in your career, and I'd like to highlight what some of those steps might look like for you. So we will talk about several topics. One is, how do you begin building the financial foundation for autonomy so that you can create the career flexibility that you want? Second is, how do you protect that autonomy so that you can sustain it? And then how do you scale beyond the short term and think about how to maintain autonomy for decades, for long term? And then finally, we'll talk about mindset, because this is a big, not just a financial shift, but this is a psychological or mental shift. And we want to make sure that you think through this, ideally before we do any of the financial stuff. So let's start with the foundation. When we're talking about building a foundation so that you can create your own career autonomy, I like to start with something that I like to call building your courage fund. And there may be a subset of people on this call for whom debt is a big issue. And if that's the case, intelligently managing debt is going to be a big part of creating career autonomy and flexibility. So let's talk about courage fund. I sort of made this term up. Uh, it's also commonly known as an emergency fund, but I like to call it a courage fund because oftentimes for this, in the context of career flexibility, this is really important to give you the confidence to get what you want. This fund is made up of short-term financial reserves, and its sole purpose is to tide you over any income loss that you may experience as part of this transition. This is all money you'd ideally put into safe, non-volatile, cash equivalent accounts like money market funds or high yield savings accounts. And the purpose it serves is this: when you build a courage fund, you decrease short-term reliance on your employer, and that gives you the power to create career flexibility for yourself, and nobody needs to know about it if you keep it secret. This is entirely your business. Let's talk about how that courage fund can buy you the time for flexibility. All right, warning ahead, there are some minor math coming. The courage fund, it can buy you months of flexibility, and that is in relation to what your monthly expenses are. So let's give you an example. Let's say that your family spends $10,000 every month, and you build yourself a $20,000 courage fund. That courage fund will buy you 2 months of flexibility, $20,000 divided by 10,000. So in real life terms, imagine if you were to be laid off for 2 months, or you more positively decided to take a 2-month sabbatical. That courage fund can tide over your family. Your kids would not know the difference. Your family well-being would be fine for those 2 months. Now, obviously, there might be situations where you want a little bit more time. And how can you get more time? Well, the financial planners would say, well, look at the math. There are 2 ways. You can either decrease your monthly expenses because then your courage fund goes farther, or you can build up a much bigger courage fund. And both of those, or and either of those, will buy you more months of career flexibility. But how many months do you need? This is a very individual question, and many of us might have different answers. I think there's some scenarios where you may not need as many months. If you have multiple income sources so that the loss of one income source wouldn't be catastrophic, you can probably get away with a little less. Similarly, if you are in a specialty or a geographic area where the job market is just hopping and you are not worried about getting a job quickly, you're probably okay there too. If you have a work plan B and C, you already have a job offer somewhere else, then you can also probably get by with fewer months. On the other hand, let's say you have a restrictive covenant in your contract like I had, or if there are limited work opportunities in your area or specialty, or if you're part of a single income household, these make you far more vulnerable to income loss. And you probably want to build a bigger courage fund to buy yourselves more months of safety just in case. And if you have significant debt, that's also going to play a role. And it's this topic I want to focus on now, this issue of significant debt. This may be more so for the early career physicians in this audience than the more senior physicians, but in 2026, I do think we owe these early career doctors a little conversation on debt. Debt is one of the things that is most fatal to career flexibility. And the way I, as a financial planner, will think about it is because it hits this equation in two ways. One is when you have high debt, it hampers your ability to build the courage fund you need to buy that flexibility. And the second is that you have this fixed monthly expense from your loan payments, and that means you have larger monthly expenses to cover. It's really a double whammy. And people with significant debt, usually like student debts, especially if you're coming out of training, it's really, really hard to buy that power to get career flexibility. So, for those of you who have student debt, two slides for you. If you don't have this problem, take a moment to, to be silently grateful for this and bear with me for two slides. If you do have significant student debt, you must choose a path, and it's going to be one of these. Either you're going to go for loan forgiveness through PSLF or IDR, or you're going to pay off the loans, either within the federal system or by refinancing privately. Now, since the One Big Beautiful Bill Act passed last year, the student loan landscape changed dramatically, and it is still continually changing in unpredictable ways. So I'm only going to put in one slide here just because this is the subject of its own talk. But these are the three plans within the federal student loan system that will still exist in 2028 when the others have phased out. If this is applicable to you and you haven't you're not as familiar with these three plans as you should, please screenshot this right now and use this as a basis to do a little bit more research so you understand the pros and cons of these payment plans. So for the purposes of student debt, I will leave it at here, but for the sake of the bigger picture of building your foundation, you want to build your courage fund to buy as many months as you can for career flexibility. And if debt is an issue, you want to have an intelligent plan for that. Let's move to the second part. Let's talk about defending your autonomy. If you want to stay autonomous in your career, we have to worry about financial risk that could take away that autonomy. And what you want to do is plan for worst case scenarios and know what you're going to do there, and also develop plan Bs and Cs for income. So, worst case scenarios from a financial standpoint, I think there are four main groups. One is disability. If you cannot generate income or work. One is if you or your significant other die. Health issues, serious injury or sickness in your family. Or, this being the USA, liability. You are the defendant and the jury has just awarded $1 million claim against you. These are all financial scenarios that we want that could easily take away your autonomy. So when I talk to physicians and trying to get a sense of how well defended they are from these liabilities, I go through these one by one. And one question you can ask yourself, do a quick audit of yourself, is how well protected are you now? For disability, do you have adequate disability insurance? Do you have appropriate life insurance? Do you have a will that spells out who's going to be the guardian of your kids when you die? If you and your spouse die, and where the money's going to come from? Do you have adequate health insurance with affordable out-of-pocket maxes? And do you have malpractice and umbrella insurance? Now, since we're talking about career flexibility, I'm going to add an extra layer to these questions, and that is this. How many of these protections come from your workplace? Because if you are in a situation where your ideal career does not come with benefits, you may need to think about individual ways to cover these risks. That might involve individual own occupation disability insurance, individual term life insurance. Both of these can be portable between jobs. If you've never been off of a workplace plan, you may need to look at Affordable Care Act exchange health plans, off exchange private market plans, or look at your spouse's workplace plans. These are all options you can consider. And some people may want to consider having individual malpractice and tail insurance. These, by the way, may not be bad things to consider, even if you are not planning to leave full-time work that has benefits, because this can buy you a lot more versatility and flexibility later on. And then we always want to minimize any income gaps by having a plan B and C. So this is how I might think about this. Let's say right now at your status quo, you are in your current workplace and there is something about it that you would like to change, from a flexibility standpoint. Now, the people at your workplace don't yet know that you're going to ask for these changes soon. And the changes that you have, let's call this plan A. These are the changes that you need and will ask for. But right now, you don't know whether they're possible or sustainable at your current workplace. So before you ask for this plan A, ideally you want to be in a situation where you already have a plan B. You already have an interview coming with plan B's practice tomorrow, which you're doing under no pressure because you're not even leaving yet or anything like that, because this will make you add an extra layer of safety. And honestly, it's not a bad idea to put out feelers for a plan C either that you can learn about with no pressure. The line I found myself using a lot was, "Hi, I'm not actively looking, but I'm just curious. What do you anticipate will be your greatest needs within the next 5 years? Is there something within general cardiology?" I'm speaking for myself, of course, that you might need. And this gets me some context. And so I have some plan Bs and Cs cooking as I'm negotiating my plan As. And the point here is that you want to avoid needing to use your courage fund, because the longer you can sustain that courage fund, the longer you can sustain career flexibility. Career flexibility is not something you just gain and have forever. You have to protect it, you have to sustain it. And this is the financial background toward doing that. So plan for worst case scenarios and develop plan Bs and Cs for incomes to protect your ability to stay autonomous. Next, I'd like to talk to scaling way bigger, long game. How do you create sustainable autonomy for decades? To do that, you want to build something I like to call the independence fund. And ideally, you do it with a tax triangle in mind. So we're going to get a little bit of financial planning wonky here, but let me explain why. First, let me describe what I mean by independence fund. We talked a little bit about courage fund, and independence fund is kind of a parallel to that. Instead of months of flexibility, what you want to be able to buy is years of freedom. So independence fund divided by your annual expenses, that is your years of freedom. These are two different things that serve two different purposes, and they're both important. The courage fund, like we said, this is what is going to give you the power to create the career flexibility you want. And the independence fund is going to decouple what you want your life's work to be from your need to generate income. This is the financial planning equivalent of tenure, to give you the freedom to do what's really important with your life and not have to worry about money. And these are two things that you want to build in parallel. So for a courage fund, you would want to put things in short-term savings, whereas independence fund, you're thinking more long-term investments. They both have different strengths and weaknesses. The strengths of the courage fund is that this can stay stable over a short period of time, whereas the independence fund, this can be optimized for long-term growth while minimizing taxes. And they also have weaknesses. If you keep a courage fund for 30 years, eventually that value is going to erode because of taxes and inflation. Whereas for an independence fund, you worry about having to need it in the short term because it can face a lot of short-term market volatility. So what do you actually invest your independence fund in? I like to think about this in terms of tax buckets. In one group, you have tax-protected accounts, which include pre-tax accounts or traditional accounts, or post-tax or Roth accounts. And then you also have another group that's taxable brokerage accounts. Let's talk about, and in any of these accounts, you can invest in anything you want. These buckets don't determine what you invest in. You can invest in stocks, bonds, mutual funds, ETFs, real estate, crypto, whatever. Let's talk a little bit about those tax-protected accounts first. And many of you may be familiar with these because of your workplace 403bs, 401ks, or if you have an IRA. So pre-tax accounts, when you put money into that, you get a tax deduction in that same year when you contribute to the account. That money also grows tax-free, and you pay the taxes when you eventually withdraw it in retirement. So that is a great ideal account if you're in a high tax bracket now and you think you're going to be in a lower one later. For example, if you're in your peak earnings years as an attending, as a general example. Now, post-tax accounts are different. You don't get any tax deduction up front, but the money grows tax-free and it stays tax-free forever. And that is great if you're in a lower tax bracket now than you think you will be when you take that money out. Sometimes that makes a lot of sense if you are shifting to part-time and you have lower income or you go into a sabbatical. Now, these tax benefits do come with trade-offs. There are some restrictions here. For both groups, that money is meant to be used in retirement. So if you take out earnings before you're 59.5 years old, you have to pay a 10% penalty on them, which is pretty hefty. And then for the pre-tax accounts, eventually the government wants its money back. So once you reach a certain age, between age 73 or 75, depending on what year you were born, you have to do what's called required minimum distributions, where you have to take that you're forced to take that money out whether you want it or not, and then you have to pay taxes on it. And then you have the other group, taxable accounts. There are no tax benefits here, but they're far more flexible, and we'll talk about that. So you can invest independently of the tax protected accounts that you might have in your workplace retirement accounts or your IRAs. But your work is not going to set this up for you. This is something you have to do on your own. And you can open an investment account at any brokerage like Vanguard, Fidelity, Schwab, just like opening a bank account. Now, there are some downsides to these accounts. There's really not much tax benefit. You don't get any deductions. You have to pay taxes on dividend earnings as you go. And importantly, they're not protected from creditors. There's no asset protection here. They're just as vulnerable as your bank accounts, whereas retirement accounts often have more legal protection. But the upsides is that there are no limits or age restrictions. You can do anything you want with that money. And because capital gains taxes tend to be lower, you can have potentially lower tax rates than you have for earned income. They're also wonderful for donating to charity because if you donated appreciated shares, neither you nor your charity has to pay the taxes on that. And so when financial planners talk about tax diversification, they often talk about building a tax triangle. There's not one group that's superior to the others. They all have their pros and cons here, which I've put in this little triangle here. They all have their strengths and weaknesses. Generally, good idea to have some money in each bucket because that gives you some versatility in case there are unpredicted tax policy changes in your future. So to scale this for decades, you want to build your independence fund, buy yourself years of freedom, and you do that tax efficiently with a tax triangle. And that's the financial planning side to building the autonomy that you want. I'm now going to take off my financial planning hat and just speak to you as a fellow clinician who has gone through this process of going from a more traditional career to something that I created on my own that's very flexible but kind of uncharted. And this is not just a financial journey, this is a psychological and mental journey. And I want to share a few lessons I've learned that I would recommend that you think about before you start doing any of this. The point here is that you want to be able to very clearly and very clearly understand and very clearly be able to communicate your why. Why is it that you want more flexibility in your career? That means you need to be able to define the boulders in your stream. We'll talk about what that means. And you also need to be able to negotiate like a business owner. And we'll go into these two seemingly unrelated things. Let's talk about priorities. And when I talk about boulders in your stream, I like to imagine that your personal and professional life and what you are striving for in each of those realms is like kayaking through a river with a lot of boulders in it. What are the boulders that are non-negotiable that you have to work your way around? So right now, all of you will have some personal goals that you want to achieve and some professional goals. Some of them you are achieving and some of them you're not. And that's okay. We all know what those are. All of us are dealing with our own versions of this. Things are a little different once you have career flexibility and autonomy. You still have those goals, but what ends up happening is, and what I've learned is the ones that you actually achieve, those are the ones that you have to prioritize. And there are some that you're going to have to choose to let go. That's what ends up happening with career flexibility. For me, what it looks like is something like this. These are the boulders that I have in my life, in my stream right now. And my kayak is my professional goals, both in the clinical space as well as the financial planning space and in society. These are very important to me. And there are some days where navigating these rapids is exhausting. It feels really, really hard. But when you think about it, it's actually pretty awesome. I have a smile on my face when I'm doing it because the boulders that are in my stream are the ones that should be there. Those are the ones that I do not want to have to compromise or move. And so I'd like to ask you, what are the boulders in your stream that you want to have? Because when you have career flexibility, you no longer have any excuses or anyone else to blame. This is on you. And this is something I've had to learn. What are the boulders in your stream? What will have to fit around them? And what will you choose to let go? because things will fall aside, and it's much better to be intentional about it than to let it happen by default. And now let's talk about what it's actually like asking for the changes that you want to make your career more flexible, planning for your ask. And the challenge I'd like to leave you is to think like a business owner. And I recognize many of you may be W 2 employees, and that's totally fine. This still applies. As an employee, this is how you might think. You might define yourself as a clinician at whatever practice you're at. And you may pride yourself very reasonably as being an invaluable member of the team because you do good work. You're dedicated to your patients and to your colleagues and to your institution. What I'd like to encourage you to do is to try a mindset shift. Instead of thinking as an employee like this, think of it this way. You are a business owner. You're the business owner of a one-person business, and that business is to provide world-class service and value to your clients, one of which happens to be wherever you work. As soon as you think about it this way, things change a little bit because there's certain things that a business owner will and will not accept as part of that arrangement. And when you ask for the things that you want as a business owner for career flexibility, you want to think about what outcomes are possible. Generally speaking, they can fall into 4 groups, depending on whether you or your client get what you value. We are all afraid of this. We're afraid that our negotiations will not go well. We won't push hard enough. You're going to deliver everything your client values, but you're not going to get what you value, and you will end up feeling exploited or resentful. On the other hand, you might push really hard and you might get what you value, but your client doesn't. And that may be great for the time being. But eventually things may shift. And if the client has a better offer, there's another person who could do the job better, or the tides change, the climate shifts, there's a change in leadership, you could easily lose that win. So that I think of that as an unsustainable win. We all know cases where discussions don't go anywhere and nobody's happy. So what we really want to shoot for is a win-win situation where you get what you value. You deliver what your client values and they know it because that is a sustainable win. So I encourage you all to think in this fashion. Win-win or no deal. And that comes straight out of Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And what that looks like when in the context of career flexibility is you want to ask, how can I achieve career flexibility while ensuring my clients achieve what they value? And you can't answer that question unless you know. What is it that your client really values? What do they really need? Do you really understand it? Do you know what your leaders lose sleep about at night? Do you know what the greatest threat to your practice is that they worry about, what their greatest need is? Most of us don't. And if you don't, that's okay. Sincerely ask until you do, because you want to have that information before you go into a negotiation. And you want to know very early on, and it won't be hard. Is your client sincere about finding a win-win arrangement? Because if they're not, find other clients. That's why you have a courage fund. And that is how you want to be able to approach a negotiation when you are trying to achieve sustainable career flexibility. So clearly understand and clearly communicate your why for career flexibility. Know your boulders, negotiate like a business owner. So we had one objective, and hopefully we've done that here. In this talk, I know we've covered a lot. Hopefully you've identified one financial step that you can take in the next month to achieve more flexibility in your career. And if you had to step away to, feed the kids or something, let's go over what some of those steps might be. One of them is your courage fund. That courage fund that you build can buy yourselves months of flexibility before anything has even changed. That's going to be part of your financial foundation. You want to make sure that you are in a position to defend your autonomy from financial risks with appropriate insurance, keeping in mind which of those protections are reliant on workplace benefits, and ideally what plans B's and C's you have for income so that you don't have an income gap. You want to think long-term. How can you scale this so that you have not months, but years and decades of autonomy? And you can do that by building your independence fund with a tax triangle. And finally, define your boulders. Be clear on what you want, win-win or no deal. So I will stop there. That's all I have. I really want to thank the members of Maryland ACP and especially Mary Ellen Woodward, who does so much behind the scenes and helped make this happen, and my family who have put far more trust in me than I deserve through this journey. Happy to take any questions now. If you'd like to contact me with ask questions separately, do so via email, or you can use the QR code at the bottom, and the my website will access my Calendly, and that it's not like a sales thing or anything like that. That's just the easiest way to book a call with me if you want to talk about this. All right. So thank you all very much for having me. I will turn it over to the moderators.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. That was fantastic. And I think we already have a question from Dr. Deepak.
Um, so I loved your Courage Fund and the Independence Fund. What do you do if, for example, in the current situation, if there is prolonged, like you cannot predict how many months you're going to need that fund for?
Yeah, it's a great question. How can you predict how many months you have? You can't predict the future, and that's why I had that slide that looks at what might skew you toward having fewer months versus more months. If you are in a single income household, you have a non-compete, you have significant debt, you might need to buy yourself more leeway. This is a safety cushion, and it's both a financial question as well as a how do you sleep at night question. I'll tell you personally, when I had my 18-month non-compete, the number my wife and I settled on was 12 months because the job market for non-invasive cardiology was pretty good at the time. But I have 2 kids. I could not take any chances. I wanted to be extra careful. We did end up tapping into the Courage Fund, which thankfully did not deplete it. But that is a very individual question that is part math, but very much part psychological and individual.
And how does this, just a second question to that. So, how do you do it when you're just coming out of residency or fellowship, right? Like, it's good at our stage, but how do you do it at that stage?
Yep. If there are any early career physicians or residents here, start building your Courage Fund now. Because I wasn't thinking about building a Courage Fund. That was just part of my financial planning anyway during my first several years as an attending. So luckily, I did have some reserves, and that gives you a lot more financial resilience to make changes if you need to. Uh, so you want to be building this Courage Fund ideally before you need it, because you can take your time and build it slowly over time. So for early career residents, no, I don't expect you to have this built in 3 months. That's especially if you have a lot of student debt. But you want to start laying the foundation so that it can slowly accumulate, so that one day you will have the ability to be able to negotiate for far more. This is a long game plan.
Thanks very much. We have a question from, it says Asha Thomas, but I think it is not Asha Thomas. I think it's a shared link. So if you could just state your name and your question. So for whoever's listed Ashram, if you can unmute yourself and ask your question. Okay. All right. You're still on deck, but maybe we'll go down to Dr. Christmas for her question.
Stan, that was fantastic. And I love the framing. It makes so much sense now that you've said it in a way to like plan and kind of guarantee, only you can plan your life to make yourself happy, right? It's in your control and nobody else is just going to sort of hand it to you in a platter. So I love this. Like it gives us really good tools and ways to think about how to be financially stable so we can be in control. My question is a little bit different. And maybe it's because I'm at a different phase in my life, but I wonder if you have guidance or thoughts about um, leaving a legacy and charitable giving. And, so I've had a lot of debt that's gone, thank goodness that, and then managing mortgage, we're good with this, but we're trying to put aside money, there's 2 schools of thoughts, whether you give now or you save up and do a bigger thing later. And I just wonder if you have any input on that at all.
I love this question because it's so rare. Nobody ever invites me from a medical organization to talk about this. It's always about, something like, how do I take away something that's hurting? How do I move to something better? So to be able to plan for the sake of the betterment of the community, I love doing this. Um, I think you identified the split. Do you want to do this while you're alive? Or do you want to leave this as a legacy after you're gone? And there are pros and cons to both, not just from a financial side, but also from you personally. Do you want others to remember you a certain way after you're gone? Or do you want to actually see the impact of your giving? And there's no right or wrong answer here. Now, depending on which you choose, there are really good and tax efficient options to do either. So, for example, if you want to give while you're alive, opening up a donor advised fund might make a lot of sense. And this is, for those of you unfamiliar, the idea is like it's kind of like your own little private foundation, but it's like as simple as opening a bank account. And what you can do is like if you have a taxable brokerage account, you have appreciated shares of investments, you can just donate that into the donor advised fund, take the tax savings right there, and then that donor advised fund, you can invest in it and donate to charities, um, whenever you want from that. Then I actually do all my donating solely from that because I'm able to donate a lot. I can do it anonymously and I don't get any charity junk mail or anything like that because I can just do it from the Liu Family Giving Fund without giving my address. So that's a big part of what I do. Now, if you want to leave something for after you're gone, there are a lot of trusts you can build. There's some charitable trusts. There are a lot of different ones that either they give portions of the balance to the charities while you're alive, and then the rest goes to an heir, or the other way around. There's lots of different ways that you can do that. But I think I would start with, do you want to see the change now? Or do you want to build for something to be a legacy so that people associate your name with a gift after you're gone? I think that's an important question to answer personally.
And if I can just follow up on that. So, is there a percent of your salary that you recommend? Or is it really, again, this is just a personal thing?
I think that's an incredibly personal question, Dr. Christmas. There are some people for whom philanthropy is not even on the radar, and that's totally fine. I don't judge. There are some people for whom, if you're not tithing 10%, you can't sleep at night. There's lots of people who feel very differently about that. What I think I would generally look at is making sure that your short-term and long-term financial needs and those of your dependents are met. And then after that, you can see how much is left, how much can we give, what impact, how do we optimize for the impact that we want to leave and in which time frame. Looking at all that comprehensively, I think makes the most sense.
Thank you so much. Next question is from Rida. Rida, you have the floor.
Yeah, hi. I'm so sorry. I think I joined using the wrong name. So it's appearing as Arsha Thomas. I'm definitely not her. This is Rida. I'm one of the residents at Sinai. I'm graduating in 2 months. My question is about the disability insurance. We're getting emails every day to get the disability insurance. And I actually have, so what would be your recommendation? Should we start it now or just wait for my next attending job to get a disability insurance?
Yeah, great question. Two things. One is be very afraid if you're getting cold emails, because there are lots of unscrupulous advisors who are, insurance salespeople who are trying to score a fat commission, and this is not something that you want to make the decision lightly. Really, for physicians, there are only 5 companies that really offer own occupation disability insurance that you should really be considering. Um, I w- uh, so be very careful of those. I would do your own research and
Mhm.
look for your own policies separate from whatever you're getting emailed. But the need is real. And to answer your question, resident or attending, you never know when you might get a diagnosis of multiple sclerosis or type 1 diabetes that would change things forever. I gather from your voice that you're female, and sadly, we need to think about pregnancy. And I hate to even say it, but we do need to think about that because that's the world that we live in. As a resident, the way it works is when you buy disability insurance, no insurance company is going to pay more than about 60% of your current salary because they never want disability to be more enticing than actually working. Now, as a resident right now, that amount is going to be way less than what it will be in a few months when you're attending. And so what I usually recommend is that you get you lock in the resident one now, and then but you buy something called a future purchase option rider. And that gives you the ability to buy more coverage without additional underwriting later on as your income grows. And you can exercise that rider when you're in attending. The reason that matters is, let's say something big happens between now and when you're in attending, health-wise, or let's say you have a mental health issue, or you become pregnant. And I don't want to imply that pregnancy is a disability, but that's how actuaries look at it. So that's why I'm saying it. You don't want that to change your underwriting and the cost of insurance. If you are young and healthy right now, buy a resident one now. Lock in, buy the future purchase option rider. It will cost more. It's worth paying for now because that guarantees you the right to buy an attending level disability policy without underwriting later on.
Okay. Okay. Thank you so much. And I would say you are an amazing speaker. Thank you so much for coming in today and talking to us. This was great.
Thank you so much.
Natalie, you have several appreciation comments in the chat as well. There's a question from Guo Cheng. Can you elaborate a little more on what we should pay attention to when we look at a job contract to alleviate our burden to build financial freedom?
Oh gosh, that is getting a little past my wheelhouse. Like I said, not legal advice, so not legal profession. This is still being recorded, right, Mary Ellen? Yep. Okay, I'm not getting in trouble. So there's a lot, but basically you want to make sure you understand every term in there that restricts you, that ties your hands, that closes future doors. Some of those may include non-competes, which thankfully for a lot of healthcare providers is now illegal in Maryland up to a certain income level. But you also want to look at things like, let's say you get a starting bonus. Are there stipulations that if you quit within a year that you have to pay back that starting bonus? Because that's a golden handcuff, right? And are there, will they cover your tail if you leave? What are the terms of termination with and without cause? Are they allowed to terminate you without cause? If that's the case, do they cover tail? Like, these are important things that you want to make sure that are clearly stipulated in your contract, because you don't want to be in a situation where you want to or you're forced to leave and you have a situation where now you have to pay 5 figures to cover your tail malpractice, or you have to pay back your starting bonus that you already spent, or situations that basically keep you trapped and take away your ability to control your own destiny. Those are the things that I think it's really worth working with an expert contract attorney, specifically working with physician contracts, to look into things like that. What I said is just a few examples of those. That is not by all means all inclusive.
And a question for, really, I guess everybody, but particularly for early career, and when I say early career, like actually attending job, or maybe even at the resident stage, when we think about, saving and planning, and, putting aside what people's other financial obligations are, whether it's childcare, parent care, loans, and we don't know what people have. But, they are faced with, and again, let's say it's a resident, with the ability to do the buy-up for the disability insurance, to do their employer 403B or whichever mechanism they have for retirement up to the match or more, whether they should do a Roth IRA, whether they should put stuff in the taxable accounts. How should they start to even approach it? And I know it's very individual and value-based and basically what your resources are, but I think it's confusing for people, and then there's like a paralysis because you're like, I don't know what to do. These are too many, and they know they're all good things, but which one do you prioritize and how do you make a decision?
Yeah, it's awful, and it's so ironic, isn't it? Because the time that your money can do the most for you is when you have the least of it. That's how it works, and it's, many of us, those of us who are later career, frankly, probably have more than they need, and meanwhile, these new graduates are forced with millions of different ways to use their money and not enough of it to go around. So yes, you're right. You have to prioritize, and what I always what I like to do when I talk to physicians is really go through like what are these priorities? What are the personal ones? What are the family ones? What are the financial ones? What are the ones that you have no choice but to deal with, like debt? And how can you make them all less painful? And which ones can you put off? Which ones do you need to prioritize now? There are, for example, some things that I think everyone would agree that you want to prioritize. If you are, as an example, if you are fortunate enough to get a 401k match, I think most of us would agree that probably a good idea to prioritize contributing to your 401k to at least get that match because that's an instant 100% return. That's pretty much part of your salary that you're leaving on your table if you don't do that. I think that's one example of like one that's pretty easy. Um, but obviously, if you have something that you have to pay for and you can't afford to do that, we're not going to judge that. You have to take care of your emergencies. So this is, like you said, very individualized. But what you want to think about is what are the opportunity costs of each one? Can you prioritize them and make a very conscious decision? How are you going to knock these out in order? And in order and in parallel, how do you want to do it? And that is where a financial planner honestly can really add a lot of value by helping to clarify that because that is really, really hard.
Thank you. Other questions? Definitely, we do have a lot of residents on. If you could even comment, and again, if it's not in your area, feel free to just say, no, it's not my area. But even as they're thinking about those other things that when they join a residency or a job that you're deciding, right? Like just like the things I asked now with their health insurance and whether when they're potentially younger and more healthy, whether an HSA type of thing is a better long-term investment. But there's two ways you may have more out of pocket, but you're able to invest at that younger age so that it can grow over time, and using that as part of their financial planning.
Yeah, so Dr. Thomas, I think you're referring to like if you have a choice between like a gold plan and a bronze plan, where gold plan you pay a higher premium but you have lower deductibles versus a bronze plan is lower premiums but you have a higher deductible, but that gives you the eligibility to invest in a health savings account. I think that's what you're getting at. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, the one where you are basically you have the health insurance, but you are paying into the HSA, and to make it really work, you would just leave that money in the HSA, let it grow over the next 30 years, and that you would just pay out of pocket for other things, and using that as an investment tool.
Yeah, so
'Cause
some
and the only reason I ask is I even for myself, I was always very confused about it. And I was every year for years, I would be reluctant. I'd be reluctant. But and again, this is why I want your expertise. The more I understand about it, I think it's probably the most beneficial when they are younger and healthier, but you have to have some financial ability to pay for something because you do have a little bit more out-of-pocket cost.
right. So let me I think because this is an area that not all of us know about, I'm going to just talk a little bit about basics, right? So Affordable Care Act has some limitation. They made limitations of for what insurance plans have to do. You can't exclude for pre-existing conditions. You have to have an out-of-pocket max, and there are plans that allow for lower premiums but higher deductible, meaning you pay more every time you use their services. But that is the silver lining is you have access to a health savings account, which is something that you can invest money in. Now, if you remember the tax buckets that we talked about, a health savings account is a whole other animal. It is, you get a pre-tax deduction, it grows tax-free, and if you use that money for healthcare, it's also tax-free. So it could potentially be like a triple tax savings account. And so I think what Dr. Thomas is saying is if you are in a situation where you don't have a lot of healthcare expenditures, it may be worth doing a um, high deductible health plan so that you pay lower premiums and you have access to that HSA, which can be a wonderful investment tool. What I will say to that is it makes sense to a degree, but I would not look at this as a financial question first. I would look at this as which health insurance is right for me and my family first. Because even if a HSA is a wonderful tax savings tool and investment tool, if your family has health needs, you probably don't want a high deductible health plan. You're probably better paying the higher premiums that has more coverage. Even if you forego the HSA, you can always put more money into a taxable account. It's not the end of the world. But if you're going to do that strategy, then the idea is that you want to invest in that health savings account, but never touch it. Let it grow and pay out of pocket for your actual expenditures. Don't reimburse it from your HSA because that defeats the purpose. You want to let it grow. That said, you need to have money for that. So that's actually what I do for my family. We are fortunate to be pretty happy. We have a high deductible health plan. And what I basically do is our family, we have our out-of-pocket max for our policy sitting in a savings account in a separate bucket, and we just reimburse ourselves from that. Meanwhile, we invest in a health savings account to let that grow into perpetuity. That's going to be my age 65 like healthcare fund. That's one way you can do it. Now, for a resident or a newly graduated resident looking for a new job, you may not have that financial bandwidth. You may not be able to afford an annual out-of-pocket max of $8,000. You may not have that cash lying around. So that may not be a great strategy for you. So I would say look at your insurance needs first and then decide if a health savings account investment strategy makes more sense for you.
All right, we are at 7:28. Any last questions?
Hello.
Yes.
Hi. My name is Matthew. I'm a resident. We've
Hey,
been
Matthew.
hearing a lot about index universal life insurance. I don't know if you have any advice about that, the kinds of life insurance we should look into. There's one called,
Yeah.
the one that I'm mentioning is called the index universal life insurance. I don't know.
Yeah.
Sounds very interesting.
Short version, don't do it. And I know I'm not supposed to be giving financial planning advice here. This gets marketed to young doctors all the time. And the reason is because insurance agents make a huge commission off of it. The short version why is because if you have life insurance needs, it's much cheaper to buy a term life insurance policy. That's basically like you buy it for a certain amount of period, for a certain benefit, for a certain amount of time, for a certain amount of money each year. And when you don't need it, you're done with it. What index universal life insurance does is it combines life insurance with a cash value policy where you're not just paying for insurance, you're also investing in a cash value account. And the idea is that you can invest at the same time. If you don't use the insurance, meaning you don't die, then you have that investment account. In theory, sounds great. In reality, it almost never works out for doctors because there is so much overhead and the returns are so low that it often takes years to break even. Also, the annual cost for life insurance with one of those plans compared to a term, it can be 10 times as much. And that is almost never the right way to be spending your money when you are fresh out of training. I am not surprised you've heard of this because everybody tries to sell this. It sometimes may make sense as an estate planning play, or if you are trying to find ways to eventually give money to your heirs and bypass estate taxes. That's more of like a, really rich people, late career type problem. But almost always for early career residents, unless you have some special needs, you want to buy the safety net you need for as cheap as possible. And it is almost never that. Buy term life insurance if you need it.
Thank you.
And Dr. Lu, there was just one last question in the chat to confirm the Courage Fund is completely different from the emergency fund.
Yeah, great question. Yeah, it's same idea. This very same idea. But the Courage Fund, I think of that as separate from like your emergency fund is your water heater breaks down, a tree falls in your car, you want to take care of that, right? We're not talking about career flexibility. The Courage Fund is separate because you want to have all those basics covered, but you also want to be able to walk in to negotiate for better career flexibility, having that Courage Fund behind you and not letting it be the same fund that you need if your furnace breaks. So that's how I would think about that. Now, it's not wrong to say kind of augment. Like, let's say you have a 6-month emergency fund and you decide to make it a 12-month one. That's totally fine. It's the same idea. You can compartmentalize it differently, or but at the idea is that you want to do some mental accounting where you have a separate pool of money that's purely there to tide you over in case things don't work out. Great question.
Yeah.
Dr. Lu, thank you so much. It was a really fantastic session. We are so appreciative to you and your time and sharing with us all your expertise.
No, thank you very much. And these were great questions. And I'm impressed how many residents came out to this because it goes to show how important this is, having career flexibility and autonomy. And you young residents, start building it now because you never know when you'll need it. And building a good financial footing now will give you a lot more autonomy later on. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Lu. Really appreciate you doing this for us.
Of course.